Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russian-Ukrainian war. There's been a lot of talk recently about the Ukrainian HIMARS missile strike against a vocational school number, I believe it was 19, 9 or 19, where there was a significant component of the Russian armed forces, possibly in excess of anywhere from 400 to 600 Russian soldiers at this vocational building. We don't know the exact why behind these Russians being at this locale. And it's a very small locale, and I'll take you to that area right now, where you can see for yourself where this strike occurred. So the town is just to the northeast of Donetsk. The town or city is called Makivka. I believe I said that right. It's to the southeast of Hospital number 2. So if we scroll into Hospital number 2. You can get your bearings. And then if you go due west from this Yasna retail or market site here, you will then find the vocational building. Each floor is approximately 20,000 square feet. It is nestled in between what you would maybe call suburban areas of single-family homes with not a lot of structures very close to it. So it kind of sets out there by itself. And again, this building was hit by approximately 4 HIMARS missiles. And there appears to have been ammunition also being stored at this site as well. And this complex was completely leveled. The Russians are claiming that now 89 Russian servicemen were killed in this strike, and quite possibly many more injured. The Ukrainians are claiming 400 Russian KIA. So again, at a certain point, we will find out the true outcome of this strike. The Russians are also saying that it was from the use of Russian service members' cellular phones being utilized. Now, was that the cause of this strike? Probably an element of using those phones were part of this strike. But you have to understand, the Ukrainians are receiving the benefit of the full capability of the U.S. National Reconnaissance Office and other assets as well. Basically, in layman's terms, the U.S. is looking down on this conflict zone using its spy satellites, its signal intelligence capability, radar satellites, optical satellites, and are providing the Ukrainians with real-time information about the deployment of Russian forces. The Russians do not have the same level of capability as the United States. The Russians are behind the United States in the deployment of many of these so-called spy satellites, signals intelligence capabilities, and the ability to sense the battlefield in real time. There's a possibility that the Ukrainian HIMARS system that fired those missiles at this target probably did not even know what they were shooting at. The U.S., the United States, in all probability, was able to observe what was happening at this locale, identify it as an area where there were significant amounts of Russian troops deployed, and also Russian supplies of munitions also stored at this facility, or being used as a transit point to be deployed to military units in the field. The GPS coordinates were simply then transmitted to the nearest HIMARS system, and that system launched its missiles. And that's kind of what the Russians are currently dealing with within the confines of this war. They are up against a great deal of technology that the Russians simply don't possess. I mean, they possess elements of this technology, but not on the scale that the United States deploys this technology. And I'm talking about the ability to sense the battlefield. And it's just not spy satellites, it's other systems as well. And again, in this one strike, in all probability, a large group of Russian soldiers were killed in this attack. We're also hearing that the Ukrainians are preparing for a major offensive, possibly around March. Now, the Ukrainians are being very vocal about the fact that they intend to prosecute this war until all areas have been regained control by the Ukrainians. That includes the Crimean Peninsula. So what happens next? What are the Russian options? Well, outside of the prospect of a new Russian offensive, there could be deployments of other weapon systems. If this conflict continues to spiral in terms of U.S. and Western assistance to the Ukrainians, in all probability, the Russians are going to escalate. They do not have any other option at this point other than to escalate the conflict. And you're seeing this conflict continue to escalate. Now, look, the coverage, the media coverage, in terms of, let's say, the general population inside the United States, is oblivious to what's happening. They're oblivious to the root cause of the conflict, not just the Russian invasion, but events prior to 2014 that got us into this place we're in now. Again, as I talked about before, much more complicated than just Russia invading Ukraine. What has happened, goes back to the late 90s and the expansion of NATO. But as we watch this conflict continue to escalate, and it is escalating, we're starting to see the use of more weapon systems. We're starting to see the use or the targeting of targets in a broader scope. Look, the Russians are going after the power and infrastructure of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are now starting to target areas inside the Russian Federation, in some cases very, very deep inside the Russian Federation, such as the Ingalls airfield, airbase. The possibility that the Ukrainians could eventually target areas near Moscow, I would say, can't be ruled out. And then what do the Russians do? Now, obviously, I think there would have to be some escalation by the Russians for the Ukrainians to pull that trigger on sending a cruise missile towards Moscow. But you can't rule it out. We're heading in that direction. I mean, we're realistically, we're heading in the direction that Russia eventually could possibly deploy tactical nuclear weapons. But it continues to progress. So that's kind of where we are right now. We're anticipating something to happen, quite possibly February, March, by either side. You hear about the possibility of a Russian offensive. You hear about the possibility of a large-scale Ukrainian offensive. Difficult to say at this point. But I don't believe the Russians will lose the Crimea. The Russians would probably use tactical nuclear weapons if they feel the Crimea is being threatened by the Ukrainians on the ground. That's my opinion. Possibility of chemical weapons as well. Now that could become problematic because the Ukrainians could manufacture and deploy chemical weapons as well, and they're not that effective on the battlefield, especially when you have militaries that are prepared for chemical weapons. The nuclear spectrum, a little different in terms of the use of tactical nuclear weapons. Look, these aren't city killers, but the use of a tactical nuclear weapon by the media would be viewed probably as something much, much bigger than its real effectiveness in terms of the use of tactical nuclear weapons. You really have to separate tactical nukes from the big city killers. You have to separate a 0.5 kiloton, 1 kiloton tactical nuclear weapon from a 100 kiloton to 1 megaton a nuclear device. Two totally different, realistically, weapon systems. But that's where we are. We'll continue to monitor. We'll continue to report. And as always, thank you for joining us today. More to come. Have a good day.